Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. This is David Gomez, and this is the last 31 by 31 interview. It's been a very exciting uh, project for me, and I am very pleased to end this series with Johnny Curiel. And yeah, it's exciting because uh, Johnny is a young executive working for JB Hunt. He's director of sales in for Mexico. And Johnny, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
David, it's a pleasure to be here.
So one of the things that I always like to let our speakers is to share their background story. So if you don't mind, could you share a little bit about your story? And you can take it, personal or career-wise. Just let them get to know you.
Sure, and I'll talk a little bit about both. But so I'm the son of two immigrants. Both my mother and father are from the Mexican state of Jalisco. They both grew up in very small towns, on small ranches, both from very large families, lots of brothers and sisters, grew up very poor, had very little education, worked very hard, manual labor on the ranch. And one of the things that my grandfather did for all his boys, they would actually go to the US every year and work as migrant workers. And so as soon as my father was 16, he started doing that. And through that, he really saw that there was a lot of opportunity in the US if you were willing to put in the hard work. And so, through that, in Mexico, my father also met my mother. They got married in their early 20s, and they decided they wanted to start a family, but they wanted to make sure that their family grew up with better circumstances than what they had. And so they made a conscious decision that they wanted to relocate to the US, and they were, chasing the American dream. And so at 23, they decided to move, and they settled in California. And that's where they ended up starting a family. And so they had 3 children. I'm actually the youngest of the 3. And really when they arrived in California, they worked their tails off. And so, a lot of times that meant that, one of them was working during the day, and the other one working at night. And so that way they could take care of the kids, sometimes working multiple jobs. And a little bit later on down the line, they decided that because of some other family members that we actually had living in the Northwest Arkansas area, and just through some of the conversations that they had with them about the opportunities that existed in Northwest Arkansas, and then you kind of combine that with the incredibly high cost of living in California, the fact that where we live, that the public schools really weren't very good. And so they were having to pay for private education. And so when I was 5 years old, they actually decided to relocate to Northwest Arkansas. And so I really grew up in Northwest Arkansas. And so I've been in Northwest Arkansas since I was 5. And I attended Springdale High School. And really since the age of 16, I've always worked in some capacity. And for me, it was really just something because I really liked being independent and self kind of sufficient to a certain extent. So at 16, I started working at a restaurant, and really throughout my high school career, I worked in different jobs at different restaurants, in retail stores. And then I went on to the University of Arkansas. And while I was at the University of Arkansas, that's actually when I started working at JB Hunt. And so my sophomore year of college, I had a friend of mine that was actually working at JB Hunt and said, hey, I think you'd really like it here. You should come interview, see what you think. And so I decided to do it. I started working at JB Hunt. I was 19 years old at the time. And for me, it was never really a long-term career choice. It was kind of just hey, I'm going to do this for right now. I'm going to the University of Arkansas right now. I'm a finance major with a minor in accounting. And this is kind of just a stepping stone to kind of get me through college. And then once I graduate, I'll do what I really want to do, which was be in the finance industry in some capacity. But you think of what was happening when I graduated. So I graduated from the University of Arkansas in 2008. And so we were in the midst of a recession. And so finding a finance job at that time was really not a very easy thing to do. And so at the time I just said, you know what, I'm going to just stick it out here. We'll see what happens. And so I was able to move into a different role after I graduated. And then fast forward 15 years later, I'm still at JB Hunt Transport. I've had the privilege of working in 8 different roles. I've relocated several times. And so I had the opportunity to relocate to South Texas at one point. And I operated our terminal in Laredo, Texas. And so I did that for 4 years. Had the opportunity to come back to Northwest Arkansas. And then last year, I actually had the opportunity to relocate to Mexico for a year. And so I was living in Querétaro, Mexico for a year. We were doing some reorganization down there. Querétaro is actually our main office in Mexico. And so for me, it's been an amazing experience. And I think about it sometimes and kind of my mindset of when I first started working at JB Hunt and not really wanting that to be my career. And then now it's really difficult for me to think about doing something different. And so just being in the transportation industry, the supply chain industry has been amazing to me. It's so interesting. It's so dynamic. It's ever changing. And so if I had the opportunity to go back to the University of Arkansas and, attend and do my undergrad, it would actually be in supply chain. And so it's just been, I just kind of happened to fall into a career in transportation and I ended up loving it.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's interesting how things just kind of align in life. I guess you kind of find your calling, but you have to start from somewhere. So, I think that it opened the door for you, going into the field.
Yeah.
You're also mentioning about your parents and how they work, different jobs and try to take care of you guys. And I think that we all look for our ways to achieve success for our families and for ourselves. Could you share about any strategies that you have used to succeed in your career?
Yeah. And so for me in my career, obviously, part of the reason that I do talk about my family and kind of their background is because I feel that that's really kind of helped shape me and a lot of the determination that I have in my work is because of what I saw them do and just the long, nights and weekends and never really thinking about themselves, just always thinking about the kids and the future and wanting to make sure that they were set up. But, in terms of my, things that have helped me in my corporate career at JB Hunt and that have helped me develop, one of the things that I think is most important is just taking ownership of things. And so that means taking, ownership of your performance and ownership of your mistakes, more importantly. Some of the most valuable lessons that I've learned really throughout my career have been the result of mistakes. And because I make a lot of mistakes, I've learned a lot of things. And one of the things that I always tell new employees that I'm hiring and that are on my team is, it's virtually impossible for us to teach you how to handle every situation that's going to be thrown at you. There's just no way. I mean, there's not enough time in the day, and our industry is so dynamic that there are new things happening all the time that you just can't teach it. I mean, sometimes you just have to learn as you go and make decisions. And so I always tell people to not be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, make calculated decisions, take calculated risks. And as long as you take ownership of those mistakes and learn from them, there's nothing wrong with that. I think where there's a problem is when you make mistakes and you make excuses, you never really learn anything from that. And so that's one of them. The other thing that I've learned in my corporate career is just the importance of relationships, in relationships both internally and externally. And I think as Latinos, we value relationships. I mean, so we're very family oriented, and we just like building relationships with people. And so I think I've kind of had an advantage in that aspect because it kind of came naturally to me. But it's always very important to form those internally and externally. So internally, with other stakeholders within the organization, and really understanding the corporate landscape and who all is involved in different decisions, and making sure you have relationships. So that way it's a little bit easier to persuade people to maybe look at your way of thinking. But then it's also very important to have external relationships. And so a lot of what we do depends on people outside of our company. And so, whether that's with clients that we work with or with third parties that just happen to be party to a transaction that we're involved in. And so just having those relationships and those connections just makes it a little bit easier to conduct business. And then finally, lastly, I think just continuous learning is very important and something that has helped me. And just making sure you're not becoming stale and stagnant, and just continuing to evolve. And so for me, what that means is, keeping up with what's going on in the industry. Mm-hmm. And so at least in our industry, and I think most are similar, but there's not a shortage of like news outlets that are talking about the latest things that are going on in different periodicals. And then also higher education, I think is important. I actually decided to go back to grad school in 2012, and I got my master's degree. I attended the University of Denver. I did an executive master's program in transportation management, and I learned so much about the transportation industry through that. And more importantly, I made some very valuable connections and met a lot of great people that I still keep in touch with today, and have actually helped me in my career at J.B. Hunt.
Okay. That's cool. And I think that kind of goes into our next question. So as you're talking about your strategy, it seems very methodical. Did you have any mentors or, did you have any value on those relationships? If you did have mentors, and if that is the case, would you share something that you learned from them with us?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of mentorship because that's something that has helped me a lot throughout my career. And just some that I think of, I mean, obviously my parents have both been mentors to me, and they continue to be. But if I think about my professional career and just some of the mentors that I've had, obviously at JB Hunt, there's not a shortage of exceptional leaders. And so there's a lot of great people that I've been fortunate enough to be able to communicate and work with. But there's one individual that stands out to me kind of early on in my career that ended up being my boss and was a mentor to me, and really continues to be a mentor to me. But he taught me probably the most valuable lesson that I've learned in my career really early on. And so I'd say about 3 years into my career with JB Hunt, and after graduating, I started working for this individual, and I'm a very ambitious person, and I have very high expectations. And at that time, I was ambitious, and I knew where I wanted to go within the organization, and I wanted to get there very quickly. And there's nothing really wrong with that. It was just at the time, I think in my head, I thought that I was ready to perform at the level that I'm performing at now at that time. And so through some of those conversations with him, I got a good dose of reality, where it was, look, you have a lot of potential, and there's no doubt in my mind that you can get to where you want to be, but you've got to put in the time, you've got to gain the experience, you've got to work the long hours, you got to work the weekends, and really gain the experience. And if you do that, you'll get to where you want to be. And for me, it was super helpful. It was tough to hear at the time, but it helped me in so many ways, because I was starting to become a little bit frustrated, because I was like, man, I feel like I need to be here. I feel like I can do that job. I feel like I'm smart. I can do it. And so really, it kind of cut down on a lot of frustration. And so instead of worrying about hey, I've got to get there, I could really focus my time on, all right, I've got to get the experience and kind of crafting a plan for how I was going to get to where I felt I wanted to be.
Well, that's something that I think all of us, especially when we're younger, we have
Yeah.
our plan and we're eager to get there. But no, that's a really good advice, especially for any young executive who is trying to have a strategy. You cannot you cannot learn what experience teaches you, basically.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some recent events. So how does in your career and in the industry that you're in, what are some of the lessons that you have learned, or maybe even challenges that you've overcome over the last year as we've gone through COVID? I know that JB Hunt and the transportation industry, you know, it holds a lot of the supply chain. So if you could share something with us, it would be great.
Yeah, so this year has certainly been challenging, and I think a lot about last year when we were putting our plans together for 2020, and things were going really great in the first quarter, and we're making progress, and really everything was kind of turned upside down in March. And just thinking about some of the obstacles that COVID has presented us with, for me, I think that the biggest challenge has just been navigating the unknown. And just the ambiguity in not really knowing like how COVID was going to progress. And COVID has really impacted everything. I mean, it's impacted everything we've done. It's impacted every industry, but it's impacted every industry in a different way. And based on geography and like where you're based, it also kind of had a different timeline and, when it was impacting. And so I think that's been a really big challenge for us, is just navigating that uncertainty. But one of the things that we learned out of it was just the importance of flexibility and resiliency. When your plans get turned upside down, being able to come up with an alternative strategy and being able to pivot, on last minute notice. As we were going through challenges, all of our customers were going through challenges as well. Another thing that we found was very important is just how important it is to communicate in times of uncertainty like this, both internally and also externally. So internally, staying in close communication with your employees. When we went remote from one day to the other, just being able to maintain that connectivity, making sure that we still had the infrastructure so people could work from home. In Mexico, I'd say it was a little bit more complicated because, you think about the way households are kind of structured. They're not really set up to handle a home office environment, but, our employees were able to make it work. But it was very important to stay in communication, let them know what our plans were, what our vision was. There were a lot of things going on in companies similar to ours that were maybe starting to downsize a little bit, that were starting to talk about some financial concerns. And just naturally, people hear about that and they start to become concerned. And so for us, it was very important to communicate that, look, we realize there's some things going on in the industry. Here's our plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're not going to do what other people are doing. We're going to take care of you guys. That was very good, and it put our people at ease, and they were able to focus on staying safe and doing their job instead of wondering, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to have to find something right now? Yeah. And then the other thing was just staying in very close communication with our customers as well, because, based on industry, a lot of customers had to shut down from one day to the next because they weren't in essential industries. And so for us, it was very important to understand, okay, who's still open, who's shutting down, so that we could allocate our resources effectively. But then also at the same time, for our customers that were shut down, they weren't going to be shut down forever. And so we wanted to make sure that we were aligned with them so that when they did come back on, we were set up to meet their expectations, and they could run their operations smoothly, and that we were there to support them.
Wow. No, and we've noticed a lot of that. You know, I don't think there were a lot of things that just fell through. You know, and I think there was another. I think it was Al Dominguez that I was interviewing, also holding the supply chain basically. So thank you. You know, I thank you to every worker in your industry, because it really helped everybody that, you know, we could trust that that items like hand sanitizer and things like that were available to us. So yeah, a very, very important work. So since we're keeping together with the Hispanic Heritage Month, one of the things that I've been asking all of the speakers is to share how they keep their Hispanic heritage alive, and you know, how do you do it?
So I think I'm actually very fortunate in that aspect because of my job. And so I mentioned I've been at JB Hunt for 15 years. 11 of those years has been focused on our Mexico business. And so because of that, I'm always interacting with our team in Mexico. I'm constantly traveling in Mexico and meeting with our different clients, you know, interacting with our team. Had the opportunity to live on the US-Mexico border and in Mexico as well. And so I think that really helps me stay connected to my heritage, and just being able to interact with people in Mexico. And I learned so much. You know, I only lived in Mexico for 1 year, but gosh, I learned so much about Mexico, about the culture, kind of how people think, and really kind of the inner workings of that culture, that I think really helps me in my job, because now I understand better why people say certain things about maybe things that we're trying to do. And yeah, things do maybe work a little bit differently in Mexico. I think, you know, sometimes as a US company, we say, well, you know, we do things this way in Mexico, I mean, in the US, and that's great. But, you know, in Mexico, there's just there's a completely different mindset and approach and way to do things. And some things you can adopt kind of the US thinking to, and some things you can't. Some things you're just going to, you know, cause a lot of heartache and frustration and heartburn. And so it's important to be able to understand that. And then for me, to be able to effectively communicate that back to our people in the US. Another thing that helps me a lot is, you know, still to this day with my mother and father in their house, we still just speak Spanish. And so, you know, that's one thing that helps me as well. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking a little bit about my background, I've been married 10 years, and we have a 19th month old son. And one of the goals that I have is that he grows up speaking Spanish. And so he's to the point to where he's starting to speak a little bit. And so I think I've got my work cut out for me with that. But it's super important to me, because if I think about the success I've had in my career, I mean, part of the reason I've been successful is because I can speak Spanish, and it's helped me in my job. And so I want to make sure that he also has that benefit and knows about his heritage.
That's awesome. Do you feel like you learn a little bit more about yourself when you went back to Mexico and you learn the way that things were done? Like, oh, you know, that kind of makes sense why my parents do this and do that.
Yeah, I had so many of those moments where you start to think about things. You're like, oh, that's why my parents think this way. It's just a cultural thing, and just growing up in the U.S., you kind of grow up with that U.S. mindset, albeit your parents still have a very strong influence on you, and they've kind of always imparted that Latino culture and way of thinking. And you know, both have their benefits. I think we, you know, as Mexican Americans, have that advantage that we're able to kind of look at both lenses. And I think is a huge benefit for us. And it's also a huge benefit for the organizations that we work for.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question, One thing that I like to give you an opportunity to talk about is any new plans, any new projects that you're working on that you like to share with our audience.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the things that we've started working on recently as a group, so as a part of our international group at JB Hunt, is trying to formalize a mentorship program for our employees. And so for employees that we see as employees that have potential, that are high performers, or also just employees that want to have a mentor. And so something that we just started working on a couple of weeks ago, but something that to me is very important because, like I mentioned, I really feel that that's why that I've been able to have a lot of the success that I've been able to achieve. And so I'm really excited to work on that, to be able to take part in it. And just kind of through this process with talking with you and various people about this, I've started to kind of reflect back on my life, my upbringing, my career. And I started to think a little bit about, how I ended up in the transportation, the supply chain industry, and thinking about why that wasn't like the path that I chose in college. And really for me at the time, it wasn't because I didn't think it was interesting. In all honesty, it was because of my ignorance. I didn't really know that it was an option, that you could have a good career in supply chain. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is try to, work with the Walton College to try to advocate for people in high school to look at that as a career choice, because it's a lot of fun. It's very exciting. It keeps you on your toes, and you can have a very good career in it. And so that's something I'm looking forward to try to get going as well.
That's exciting. I think that that helps a lot of our students, and I feel the same way when I started my career or my studies. You don't really know what you're good at or what can catch your attention. So yeah, and it's kind of a way for you to give back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's tough too for kids, that are 18 years old to really know what they want to do with their life. So I'd love to be able to help in that process.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. I know that the Latino Business Speaker Bureau is very, very thankful that you allow us to wrap up this project, with such an upbeat note, and knowing that we Latinos have talent as yourself, going out there and representing and reaching out to younger generations. That's something commendable and something we want to see.
Thanks, David. Really enjoyed talking with you today.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thanks.
All right, well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you all a wonderful rest of your week.